Welcome to Amidst the Chaos, the podcast where we dare to find God in the middle of real life, not just the highlight reel. I'm your host, Amber Gallion, and around here we build on one foundation only, Jesus. In each episode, I'll share my journey with God, wins, wounds, questions and all, and how He brings order, clarity, and peace into the chaos of everyday life. So take a breath, bring whatever you're carrying today, and let's lean into the one who never changes, even when everything else does. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning into the very first episode of Amidst the Chaos. It means a lot that you're here, and if this episode speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe or follow so you don't miss what's coming next. All right, without further ado, let's dive into this first episode. So it's been about 5.5 months since I got water baptized and around 3 months since I started Charis Bible College here in the Netherlands. When I started, I told people, I'm going to take you with me on this journey and I'll share what God is doing in my life. And then I basically went quiet. Apart from reposting a few church pictures where I happened to be in, I didn't really share anything about my process. And that bothered me because that's not who I want to be. So I started asking myself, what is actually stopping me? And the first thing I ran into was perfectionism. This pressure that everything I put out had to be excellent, polished, deep, theologically sound, emotionally processed, and then maybe I could share it. And on top of that, God started to show me glimpses of what He was calling me into. Not small things, really big things, bigger than where I am right now. And instead of inspiring me, that actually overwhelmed me. And in that overwhelm, I did something important. I opened a door. And it was not just important, it was stupid. Where God is someone who waits for an invitation, He knocks, He speaks, He waits for you to invite Him in. The enemy is not like that. He doesn't need an invitation, he just needs an opening, and he sees that as permission to come in. God will stand there with the door wide open and still wait for you to say, Lord, I want you here. And the enemy just walks in. That is why when you stand in your authority in Christ, you can send the enemy out because they're illegally trespassing. So these past weeks and months, really, I've been asking, where did I leave doors open? Where did I give room to lies that keep me from doing what God called me to do? And to explain what I mean, I need to go back to an old picture from my past. Something from the season when I was in New Age. Back then, I was possessed by a demon. And when you're possessed, you get what look like gifts, but they're not really yours. They belong to the demon, and there's always a price to pay. And one of those so-called gifts was that I could see what I called the world of subconsciousness. In that world, everyone had a house, their house of subconsciousness. I could see the houses and the gardens around them, and the state of that house and garden told me a lot, whether people had boundaries or not, how much chaos was there in their life, how much trauma was still active, how they cared for themselves, who they allowed in, and who walked all over their yard. And some houses were well looked after with a clear fence and a gate. Others had no fence at all, and people were just walking through the garden straight into the house, opening doors that should have been private. And at the time, I believe people were somehow inviting me in. In the Bible, it does say that the enemy disguises itself as an angel of light to really fool you. And, I was fooled. But looking back, I know now I was trespassing. I was in places in people's inner world where I had no business being. When I was delivered, those gifts left. Today, I no longer see other people's houses like that. And honestly, I don't want to. But God sometimes still does use that same image for someone's house to get a message across. But I no longer visit the house. I can't go in. He'll show me this is what the house looks like now. And I genuinely believe that this world of subconsciousness is very real and that it's the battleground in the supernatural. Because of that demon, I was able to look past the veil that separates the natural from the supernatural. And the way I now understand it, when God and you work together on that house of subconsciousness, you're actually making the soil of your heart fertile. which you could also translate to renewing your thinking as mentioned in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And talking about fertile soil, it reminds me of the parable of the sower as found in Mark chapter 4, verse 3 all the way to 34. And I'll summarize it for you if you don't know it. You can hear God's word, which is represented by the seed. But if the ground isn't ready, if it's full of rocks, of thorns, or the birds can just pick it up, then it doesn't take root. When God starts to restore your house and your garden, He's actually preparing a place where His word can really sink in, grow deep, and bear fruit. So let's zoom in on what my own house of subconsciousness has looked like over the years. So in November 2018, I called in sick at work with burnout symptoms. And around that time, I got pulled into a new age, looking for healing, looking for answers, not realizing that I was actually looking for God. And over time, as I started to heal, it was like my house went through a renovation. Rooms that were destroyed got restored, broken windows were repaired, and doors that had been wide open for anyone to walk through were closed and given proper locks. And one of the hardest decisions in that period was getting divorced. Nobody gets married planning for divorce. I really didn't. And we had a child together and there was real love there. And I was fully committed to a life together with him, but we were hurting each other more than we were helping each other. We were damaging each other's houses instead of building a home together. And after a lot of pain and processing, I felt called to end the marriage. A force I knew was the opposite of what I had experienced in New Age was asking me to trust it, to trust him, and to believe that he would help me find a place to live and provide an income. And I decided to trust it and slowly began to realize that it was actually God. The one who had extended his hand was helping me get out of the mess I was in. And to put it in reference, this was June 2023. By that time, I had left most of my new age practices behind and didn't really look into that world of subconsciousness anymore. But around a year after my divorce, so June 2024, the image of my own house of subconsciousness showed up again. The inside looked beautiful, renovated, whole, but there were men all over the house and the garden. Men I knew, men I'd walked past at the gym without even saying hello, men I'd had contact with. I remember thinking, what is happening here? And I quickly realized I was seeing the desires and intentions of those men. Some were standing outside the fence waiting for an invitation. The fence, by the way, was technically there, but still wide open. And others were already inside the garden or walking straight to the bedroom. Guess what they wanted? At some point, I got so fed up with the whole scene, I thought, I don't want my garden to be a public park. I had stayed celibate since my divorce, but I had been open to someone new without really checking whether the way I was inviting a man into my life was the right way. That image explained why I had been attracting men who were emotionally unavailable or sometimes even unavailable because they were already in a relationship. In that moment, in that picture, I kicked them all out, every single one. I closed the fence and then I prayed a very specific prayer. Lord, no man is allowed into this garden unless he is the man you have for me. And for me, that prayer also solidified my purity decision, no sex before marriage. I even stretched it into no kissing before marriage, because I don't want to do anything that would tempt me to cross the boundaries God and I have set together. And later in that same subconsciousness street, I saw my ex husband, and I'm still talking about June 2024 here. First, he was hiding behind a lamppost, watching from a distance. Then, as we started talking again in real life about whether reconciliation was an option, he moved closer in that picture from behind the lamppost to standing at my fence. And he looked really annoyed by the other men that had been around the garden earlier that were still outside of the fence, as if to say, I don't like that they're interested in you. And then suddenly it was gone, and I sensed God saying he believes he's not the right man for you. And a few days later, in that same picture, he reappeared at the fence and he said, I want to be the right man for you, but I'm not. And then he turned around and walked away and didn't come back. And when we spoke about it in real life, in the natural, I shared that whole image with him and he told me, That's exactly what I felt this past week. So around the same time, my house got broken into in the natural. So not the house of subconsciousness, the house in the natural. And guess which bank card they stole? The debit card connected to the joint account we used for our son. The only card that still had my married name on it. And ordering a new card meant my married name would no longer be there. It may sound small, but for me, it felt like God underlying this chapter really is closed. You're not meant to take this name back. After that, another man appeared in my subconscious garden, a man I met at the gym where I also started working that same month. And somehow this man managed to get past the fence and stand in the yard. And honestly, that scared me. I remember thinking, wait, how did you get in here? Does this mean you're my future husband? How is this possible? I don't really know you yet. I don't even know if I truly tried to kick him out, but what I do know is that it confronted me with how hard it was to trust that God would already present me with a man he picked for me, and to trust myself in relationships after everything I've been through. The story about this man is a very vulnerable one. It's a story about confusion, rejection, public humiliation, and still choosing to lean on God through it all. It's also one of the main reasons, alongside perfectionism, that I delayed stepping out and sharing my journey. So join me in the next episode where I share more about this man and how that whole situation became a turning point in how I see love, identity, and visibility. Thanks for listening to Amidst the Chaos. I'm your host, Amber Gallion, and my prayer is that today's episode helped you see Jesus a little more clearly right in the middle of your own mess and motion. If this encouraged you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that God is building order, even when life feels anything but stable. Until next time, keep walking, keep wrestling, and keep building on the only foundation that won't move, Jesus.